My name is Jeff Morgan. I am from Dallas, Texas. I want to talk about the Texas Family Code, or as I often call it, the Texas Anti-Family Code, in Chapter 153 in particular. 153 deals with conservatorship, possession, and access. Now, under Subchapter A, it talks about the general provisions, and it states in 153.001, it is the public policy of this state to assure that parents will have frequent and continuing contact with parents who have shown the ability to act in the best interest of the child, provide a safe, stable, and nonviolent environment for the child, and encourage parents to share in the rights and duties of raising their child after the parents have separated or dissolved their marriage. Now, the first thing I want to look at is this idea of the best interest of the child. So the state says that they want to assure that children will have frequent and continuing contact with parents who have shown the ability to act in the best interest of the child. And the state has never once defined exactly what the best interest of the child is. This is a very vague and nebulous sort of thing with the state. The state talks about the best interest of the child. The state has no idea what the best interest of the child is. That is the reality. So this whole thing right here should be thrown out completely. Unless you give some type of guidance as to what the best interest of the child is, the state really is basically just picking and choosing one parent over another. I'm going to talk about this a little bit further because this whole thing with conservatorship, possession, access, this is what the state actually bases their decisions on when they award a child to one person after divorce. The second thing I'd like to talk about right here is encourage parents to share in the rights and duties of raising their child after the parents have separated or dissolve their marriage. Now, this is a big problem as well because in Texas we have the idea of a unilateral no-fault divorce, which is forced divorce. In the state, always, without exception, 100% of the time, there are no exceptions, sides to the person who wants a divorce. So basically, it says here that the duties of raising their child after the parents have separated or dissolved their marriage. The reality is, in the state of Texas, you only need one person to tear apart a marriage, to destroy a family. In the state, again, 100% of the time, there are no exceptions. The state will side with the person who wants to separate or dissolve their marriage. The state should actually be defending the institution of marriage, but there are no legal protections to marriage in the state of Texas. So there's two things right here in the public policy of the state of Texas that should be called into question. And then section 153.002, the best interest of the child. The best interest of the child shall always be the primary consideration of the court in determining issues of conservatorship and possession of and access to the child. Once again, the state has no idea what this means. I will come up right out and say that the best interest of the child in almost every instance is to be raised in an intact family with his natural mother and father, period. That's it. There is no other best interest. Divorce is very seldom in the best interest of the child. Divorce, if it does take place, is a tragedy. It's traumatic for the child in most instances. Needless divorce, unilateral divorce, which the state of Texas always supports without exception, is never in the best interest of the child. So once again, in section 153 under conservatorship, possession, and access, in the general provisions, the public policy 153.001 has a lot of problems with it. 153.002, the best interest of the child, likewise has problems with it because the state has never defined and cannot define because the state really doesn't know what is the best interest of the child. So now going down to section 153.003, it says this: there will be no discrimination based on sex or marital status, and this is for the awarding of conservatorship. The court shall consider the qualifications of the parties without regard to their marital status, or to the sex of the party or the child, in determining, number one, which party to appoint as sole managing conservator, number two, whether to appoint a party as joint managing conservator, and number three, the terms and conditions of conservatorship and possession of and access to the child. So what the state is doing right here is saying that if you are married and you go through a divorce, the state now owns your children. And the reality is the state thinks that they own your children, period. This actually is very, very discriminatory against a divorced parent because the state is telling us that they are the ones that get to appoint the sole managing conservator as if they know who the best person is. They are the ones to appoint a party as a joint managing conservator and the terms and conditions of conservatorship and possession of and access to the child. If you have a child, the child is your child. Whether you're a father or a mother, you are the father or the mother. And the state is saying here, actually, we own the children. We will tell you what the best interest of the child is. They don't know what the best interest of the child is, but they're going to come up with some type of best interest of the child standard. And number two, they're telling you that we are going to give somebody possession of the child, a child who is not theirs, by the way. They are going to take over the child and determine who will have access to the child, when they will have access to it, who the child will live with, and other things like that. And this is a big problem because, first off, in the state of Texas, marriage is not protected legally at all anymore in the state. Once you have unilateral divorce, unilateral no fault divorce, marriage actually has no legal protections. There is nothing you can do if you are a respondent to a divorce to stop the lawsuit, and it is a lawsuit. There is nothing you can do to bar the lawsuit nor to stop the divorce. So you will have divorce forced upon you. The state will always, without exception, take the side of the person who wants a divorce, and then they're going to talk to you about the best interest of the child. Once again, the best interest of the child is to be reared in an intact family with his or her natural mother and father. But then they also come down here and they say that we're going to award conservatorship. We're going to appoint one of the parents. We who have nothing to do with the creation of this child, we're going to tell you who is going to have the child. We're going to tell you what the terms and conditions of conservatorship and possession of and access to the child. We, the state, are going to tell you how you can be a parent. Now, this is problematic in many instances, but I want to focus on one thing in this video. No discrimination based on sex or marital status. Is this really true? So if there is no discrimination based on sex or marital status, one would expect that perhaps that 50% of the time the father, who is the male, would actually have the conservatorship of the child, and 50% of the time the mother, who was the female, would have conservatorship of the child. This would be a very impartial way, an objective way of measuring whether the state of Texas is actually doing just what it says right here: no discrimination based on sex or marital status. So what I was able to obtain is the data from the Office of the Attorney General of the state of Texas. And I want to go over some of this very quickly here. So basically what we have in the state of Texas is 254 counties. And by county, what they have done is that they have actually broken down who is the custodial person, the custodial parent after a divorce situation. So if you look across the top, the different columns here in row number 2, there's actually 20 different people that they refer to: the alleged father, the aunt, brother, cousin, father, grandfather, grandmother, great-grandfather, great-grandmother. This one here is missing: mother, non-relative, other, and another. And the other could be like an agency, like maybe CPS. Presumed father, the sister, the stepfather, stepbrother, stepfather, stepmother, stepsister, and I guess that one's an uncle. So we have 20 different people that could possibly have conservatorship of a child after divorce. And again, we're looking at 254 counties in the state of Texas. And if you come down to the very bottom here, this data is as of November the 29th, 2020. Once again, it comes directly from the Office of the Attorney General in the state of Texas. And if you look over here, you see that the state of Texas has 1,495,302 children supposedly in its care. Children that somehow have a custodial parent or perhaps even a non-parent. Let's look at who when the father is the custodial parent, or the mother is the custodial parent, or other. And other would be the other 18 categories. We're going to combine them all into one because there are not a lot for each individual one. But if we combine them all together, all 18 categories, we have a significant amount. And once again, we're looking at the entire thing by county, 254 counties. And if you go down to the very bottom here, you'll see once again you have the total is 1,495,302, and the others have 86,000 cases of possession. The fathers have 92,000, almost 93,000, and the mother has about 1.3 million cases of possession. Now, once again, what I'm looking at is this. The issue is section 153.003, no discrimination based on sex or marital status. Does the state of Texas actually agree with this? Or does the state of Texas just put this out there and say, here's what we're doing, and they completely disregard it? So what I decided to do was to take the example of a coin flip, because I figured if if there's no discrimination, let's like flip a coin. For my purposes, I've eliminated others, and I've eliminated these 86,000 people, and I've changed the population therefore. And I basically have done a coin flip, because you would expect once again that if this is no discrimination, if it's very impartial, very objective, if you flip the coin, approximately half the times it would be heads, half the times it would be tails. And fortunately, there are these simulations online that you can go to and you can flip coins. So what I did at the beginning, I said, okay, let me do 50 flips. 50 flips in which each flip of the coins, there's actually 100 coins that are being flipped. And I flipped basically then 5,000 coins. In each test, what I did, I counted how many heads we had and how many tails we had. So if the first flip of 100 coins, we had 66 heads and 34 tails. What I did is I said, okay, let's look at it this way. We'll say that the heads represent mothers and the tails represent fathers. That's one way to do it. So instead of heads, it's going to be mothers, and instead of tails, it's going to be fathers. So I did all of these flips, and after 50 flips, what I found out was that the average was about 52.5% of the 100 coin flips, it came up heads, which would represent the mothers having custody, and approximately 47.5% of the time it came up for a father. 47.5 out of every 100 flips, the father had custody. The maximum number of times that the mother had custody, that heads came up during the 100 coin flips, was 66. The minimum number of times was 43. So we had a range of about 23 from 43 to 66, and this again was out of 50 flips. But I thought, well, maybe 50 flips is not enough. Maybe what I'll do is I'll continue on and add another 50 flips. So out of 100 flips then, and again I took 100 flips, I replicated the first 50 and I added another 50. So basically what I've had was 100 flips of 100 coins, which would equate to 10,000 coin flips. And what I found is that for every flip of 100 coins, the average was 51.5 that the heads came up, and again, heads representing mothers, that the mothers got custody 51.5% of the time, and the fathers got custody 48.5% of the time. And that is a very non-discriminatory manner, because as we go back to what the Texas Family Code says, it says that no discrimination based on sex or marital status. The court shall consider the qualifications of the parties without regard to their marital status or to the sex of the party or the child in determining which party is appointed sole managing conservator, whether to appoint a party as joint managing conservator, and the terms and conditions of conservatorship and the possession of an access to the child. So what I would expect to see, based on the idea that this non-discrimination would taking place, that approximately 48.5% of the time the fathers would get custody, more or less, approximately. And then I thought, well, I've done 10,000 coin flips. Maybe what I need to actually do here is look at more. I had another simulation, and I said, okay, I'm going to do a different simulation. It's going to basically show the same thing, but I did 300,000 coin flips. 300,000 coin flips. Now, the interesting thing that I found about this 300,000 coin flips is that with 300,000 coin flips, the mothers got custody 150,011 times, and the fathers got it 149,989 times. So there's only a difference of 22. The larger the number is, the sample that you're using, that you will come closer and closer to what you would expect, which would be the 50-50 mark. So with 10,000, with 5,000, the average was 52.5 in favor of mothers versus fathers. With 10,000, it was 51.5 mothers versus fathers. When I went to 150,000, actually mothers went down. They were like 49.948%. And then if you looked at 300,000, it's almost exactly 50-50. 300,000 flips, and you only have a difference of 22. For all intents and purposes, true non-discrimination, true objectivity, true impartiality would say that you're looking at 50-50. That's exactly what you're looking at. So going back to the idea of standard deviations, when you look at the standard deviation, you have a range, and that's what the standard deviation right here is, 4.9. So out of 10,000 flips, the standard deviation was about 4.9. We'll say 5. For all intents and purposes, that's 5. And the average was 51.5. So if you subtract 5 and if you add 5, what it's saying is that in 68% of the cases that you're looking at, the mother would be the custodial parent in approximately 46.5, because that would be 51.5, and that if you subtract 5, that would end up being 46.5, and if you add 5, that would be 56.5. So the mother would be the custodial parent in approximately 68% of those cases, from the range of 46.5 to 56.5. Now, two standard deviations, all that means is that you have taken the standard deviation of 5 for all intents and purposes, and two standards, the 5 times 2 would be 10. So from 41.5 to 61.5, approximately 95% of the times that would be you would get that represented. So with 95% certainty, you would say somewhere, if you looked at the various counties in the state of Texas, in somewhere between 41.5% to 61.5%, that would be what the division of the custodial parent would be in the state of Texas in that county. And if you did 3 standard deviations, which would be 15, you take that down to 36.5, and it would go up to 66.5. And if based on each county, if you talk about, okay, the mothers were the custodial parent somewhere between 36.5 and 66.5, that would cover 99.7% of the examples. That's what you would expect. So when I did the 100 flips of 100 coins, I was able to actually track every instance of the number of heads and the number of tails. And from that, I was able to get a z-score. Now, what is a z-score? So I'm going to just take you to a quick site here and talks about a z-score. Simply put, a z-score is also called the standard score, gives you an idea of how far away from the mean or the average a data point is. But more technically, it's a measure of how many standard deviations below or above the population mean a raw score is. And the z-score can be placed on a normal distribution. When you look at a normal distribution, they're talking about a bell curve such as what you have here. This is considered a normal distribution. And a z-score can be placed on a normal distribution curve. Z-scores range from -3 standard deviations, which would fall to the far left. So when you come down here, the -3, this is very rarely happens that you're outside of the -3. And the same thing with a +3. It's very seldom that you're going to have a +3 for a z-score, because 99.7% of the data falls within this range of 3 standard deviations. Generally speaking, that is the rule. In order to use a z-score, you need to know the mean, which would be the average, and also the population standard deviation. So looking at what I did right over here for the 100 flips of 100 coins each time, the mean was about, again, the average was 51.5. The standard deviation was about 4.91. If you have the average or the mean being 51.5, as we have over here, and if you have the standard deviation, which will be SD, I'm going to put it on this way, you're going to end up, the first standard deviation will be 46.5 to 56.5. If you continue on down to the second standard deviation and then the third standard deviation, the range gets larger, and it gets larger, it gets broader. So in 99.7% of the time, you're going to have 36.5 to 66.5 in cases in which the percentage in which the mother will be the custodial parent, because again, the mothers are represented by the heads. So what does the data show? Because again, we have the data, and this comes directly once again from the Texas Office of the Attorney General. This is as of November the 29th, 2020. So it's barely 2 weeks old. And what we need to do then is say, okay, we know that by and large, that all of these cases right here should fall within the third standard deviation. Anything that's above 3, we have to question. So what's going on here? It may be accurate, but we need to look at it and see what exactly is going on. So what do we find when we look at the data in the state of Texas? Again, remember the underlying principle that we have here is that there will be no discrimination based on sex or marital status. Absolutely none. The court shall consider the qualifications of the parties without regard to their marital status or to the sex of the party or the child, in determining which party to appoint as a sole managing conservator, whether to appoint a party as joint managing conservator, and the terms and conditions of conservatorship and the possession of and access to the child. So what I did is this: I looked at, say, Anderson County, and again, these numbers come directly from the Office of the Attorney General, and I took all of the others, so they're all in one category. But if you add these up, the 203, the 2,345, and the 264, you get the total. For this part right here, for the 50%, I took out the others. I just said, okay, we're just talking about mother and father. We're not talking about anything else. So I subtracted the others from the total, and this is what I got. 2,548, and the expectation would be that about in 1,274 cases you would have a father who would be the custodial parent, and you would also have in another 1,274 cases you would have the mother that would be the custodial parent, because once again there's no discrimination, absolutely no discrimination according to our Texas Family Code pertaining to either sex or marital status. So if you notice here, you say, well, wait a minute, what's going on? Because in Anderson County, we have 203 fathers who are the custodial parent, and we have 2,345 mothers who are the custodial parent. And I want to make it very plain that none of this is designed to be sexist or discriminatory or anything like that. I'm just talking about the data itself. This is the data that comes from the Office of the Attorney General. And so I'm expecting that in this case that there will be 1,274 dads who are custodial parents, but the reality is it's only 203. That's a difference of 1,071 from what I would expect. And as you go down from county to county, every single number, by the way, here that's in parentheses in red, it says that we are not achieving this desired non-discriminatory factor. We somehow, something is going on here, and it's less than what we would expect. So I look down, scroll through all of the 254 counties, and guess what? I think that there might be one. Is there one? Maybe two? Nope. They're all less than what we would expect for the father to become the custodial parent. So the first thing that we would have to ask ourselves is there a problem here? Is that really, is Texas actually really keeping its bargain when it says no discrimination based on sex or marital status? Or is the state of Texas lying to us? Is the state of Texas committing fraud? Or is the court committing fraud? Because without regard to the marital status or to the sex of the party, how can it be that we have this great discrepancy here that we're talking about, where we would expect to have 1,274 fathers being the custodial parents, but we only have 203? Something has got to be going on. So I decided to also take a look at that, and I did a couple of things here. So first, what I did with this one right here, if you take a look, I looked at the percentage of fathers who were the custodial parents to the total, the real total right here. So what I'm going to do is this: I'm going to highlight these cells, and if it's less than it says here 11.36%, I'm going to change that to 10%. 10.00%. I want that to be highlighted in red with a red fill. So lo and behold, take a look at what's happening here. If we look at the counties, there are very few counties that actually have the fathers over 10% of the time being the custodial parents. So we have a county over here, which is Armstrong. Well, they only have a total of 63 is what it comes down to. So there's not a lot of people in here. We have also Baylor, which is 240 some. 11% of the fathers are custodial parents in the county of Briscoe. If you go down to the county of Carson, 249 cases, we have 12.85% of the fathers are custodial. What you'll find is that, by and large, in the case in which the fathers are over 10% of the times custodial parents, you're going to have a total number of custodial parent relationships of under 1,000, except for we have Cook County. Cook County is the exception here. You can go down the entire list and you can see that the vast majority of cases, you're talking about a smaller population in which the fathers are over 10% of the time custodial parents. Now here's an example, like Glasscock right there. Glasscock has 23 cases of custodial parents, and the fathers actually are 17.39% of the time. You come down here to Hamilton, you look down here, Hopkins has 2,395, and the fathers are the custodial parents almost 11.4% of the time. You come down here to Jones County. Again, you can look at all of these different numbers right here. And I don't know what this missing is. There's for some reason the Attorney General's office gave us 256 counties. One of them is considered missing, and one of them is out of state. So I don't even know how to figure those in, quite honestly. But once again, if you look at where the fathers are, the custodial parents, and when more than 10% of the time, it's usually with very small counties, 22% of the time in Roberts. And if you look down here at Throckmorton, 15% of the time, but there's only 60 cases of open. Right here you have Wilbarger, it's 10.35. So, but if you look overall throughout the entire state of Texas, and approximately 6.19% of the time, 6.19% of the time, the father is the custodial parent. On the other hand, if you look at the mother is a custodial parent approximately 88.3% of the time. So I thought what the Texas Family Code said is that no discrimination based on sex or marital status was supposed to be what we use as our determining factor. That the court shall consider the qualifications of the parties without regard to their marital status or to the sex of the party or the child in determining which party to appoint as sole managing conservator. So the only question that I'm asking is this: is the state actually doing this, or are they not doing it? Now, looking at the data that I've been able to see, I think that you would come to the same conclusion that I have. Well, wait a minute. The state says one thing, but the state just is not doing it. And there's a couple of other things that are even more disturbing. If you look at the others over here, what you have is that in many, many, many instances, the others are custodial parents more frequently than the fathers. So the others would be 9.39% of the time in Anderson County, whereas the fathers are the custodial parents 7.22% of the time. The mothers, of course, usually are the custodial parents, and this is 83.39% of the time. If you go on down here, I don't know what the high is. I didn't really look at that, honestly. But if I can find out very quickly. So if I come to here and work my way down, so if you look down here, in 94.3% of the time, that is the highest number of cases in which the mother is the custodial parent, and it's at least a minimum of 71.43. And this is the average. They say here is 84.44. But if you look actually at the raw data at the bottom here, the mother will be the custodial parent 88.3% of the time. And this, looking at the numbers itself, at 6.19, it's 8.03, and it's 5.77 are the others. And the others, by the way, can even be an agency like CPS or something like that. It doesn't have to be a relative. It can just, like I said, it can be a step parent of all things. So once again, now look at the numbers themselves. We see that the actual dads who are the custodial dads, 92,595 out of 1,495,302. 6.19% of the time, the fathers are the custodial parents. Now, if you look at the mothers, and again, this is not, I'm just talking what the numbers are. I'm not making any judgment calls here. The only question that I want to know is the state of Texas actually doing this, or is the state of Texas lying to us? There's the Texas Family Code that says no discrimination based on sex or marital status. Do they really uphold that? Does the court really uphold that? Or is the state telling us that the court upholds that and the court actually doesn't uphold that? Is the Texas Family Code lying to us? And when I look at just what the numbers are, I would say, boy, that's really odd. What I would expect would be approximately 750,000 times that the father would be the custodial parent, and approximately 750,000 times the mother would be the custodial parent. Again, and basing that on the idea of a coin flip. Out of 300,000 coin flips that I did, there was only a difference of 22 cases. So 50.004% of the time, the mothers, represented by the heads, were the custodial parents, and in the rest of it, it was the fathers. But it's very, very close. It's very close. That's really non discriminatory. And yet, when I look at these numbers here, it seems to be very, very, very discriminatory. Now, what I also put down here, I got this idea from the Attorney General. The Attorney General actually, when he submitted his brief to the Supreme Court regarding the election issue that took place recently, he had a statistician there. So I thought, well, let's look at what it says. Are there any statistical anomalies here? So looking at those z-scores and what I talked about earlier when you looked at the standard distribution and so on, almost everything, 99.7% of the cases should fall within 3 standard deviations. 95% of the cases should fall within 2 standard deviations. So if you have a z-score that is above 2, you've got to question something that we're not really expecting, because 95% of the time we expect it to be within this range. If it's greater than 3, we really need to look at this, because 99.7% of the time we expect the value to fall in this range. So with this z-scores, what I did, I just simplified things, because basically if you talk about a z-score that is greater than 3.8, you've got a real oddity taking place. And I decided, I'm going to go through every single county, the 254 counties, and I'm going to give the county a z-score, and to take a look to see is it something within expected range, or is it something that we have to look at this and say, what in the world is going on here? So if you look at Anderson County, which has again 2,800 custodial relations, and if you get rid of the others, it's 2,500. Looking at the fathers and everything, 7.22%. Only 203 fathers are the custodial parents. And if you assign it a z-score, which is a statistical measurement, it's negative 4.2 standard deviations away from what you would expect. In other words, this is completely unexpected. There's got to be an explanation behind this. And as you go through all of the counties, you'll see that, wait a minute here, all of the counties, except for a very few, actually have a z-score that is greater than 3.8. And remember, when we're talking about z-scores, just because you have a 3.74 z-score, it still isn't an audit. It still is it doesn't happen by and large, because everything should be at the maximum. Generally speaking, it should be 3 or less. It should not be more than 3. If it's more than 3, you should look at it, you should investigate it. So if you go down the list here, there was one county, I believe, that was under 3. Let me see if I can find it here. That would be, for whatever reason, Roberts is only a 2.73 z-score. But if you take a look at what's going on here, there's only 22 cases there. So that might be the explanation for that. If we had more cases, it would probably increase, because as we've seen with the flips of the coin, the more flips that you actually have, the closer toward the expected number you should be getting. And again, with 300,000 flips of the coin, there was only a difference separating heads and tails between, or fathers and mothers, as they were represented here by the heads and the tails, mothers and fathers, of 22. So you expect a certain thing to happen. So maybe if we did a lot, if there were more people in Roberts County, maybe it would become the norm. But the norm in the state of Texas is not 50-50. The norm in the state of Texas is much more along the lines of 88-6. 88-6. So once again, the question is this: is the state of Texas actually doing what it says it's going to do in the Texas Family Code? Is there discrimination based on sex or marital status, or is there not? Because the Texas Family Code says no, there is no discrimination based on sex or marital status. The court shall consider the qualifications of the parties without regard to their marital status or to the sex of the party or the child in determining who is going to be the managing conservator, whether to appoint a party as joint managing conservator, the terms and conditions of conservatorship and possession of and access to your child. Whether you're a mother or a father, the state of Texas is now going to dictate to you the terms and the conditions of conservatorship and possession and access to your child. This obviously is very arrogant of the state of Texas to think that somehow they know your children better than you do. And it is also very suspect as to whether if they act in a discriminatory manner or not. And based on the statistical analysis, looking at the raw data provided to us by the Office of the Attorney General as of November 29th, 2020, we cannot come to the conclusion that the state of Texas is doing this. In fact, the conclusion would be that this section, section 153.003 in the Texas Family Code, is a lie. The state of Texas is lying to us, but they have it out there. They want to deceive you. Now, from my perspective, as everybody knows, I believe that both moms and dads are important, and I believe the best interest of the child is to be raised in an intact home with his or her natural mother and father, period. That's what it is. But I have heard many people, and I've become more familiar with this issue as I've talked with people, saying, wait a minute, I'm a very good father. How come I don't have access to my children? The mother is keeping me back from seeing my son and my daughter, or our sons and our daughters. And I've heard women tell me the exact same thing. The mothers that have said, listen, I'm a really good mother, and my husband left me and he ran off with somebody else, and I can't even see my children because he's keeping them from me. By the way, this is a criminal offense in the state of Texas, but this is what people are dealing with. And it's really a shame because in the issue of no fault divorce, it's not that two people mutually wanted to leave. Often it's a forced divorce. It's a divorce in which the state will always, without exception, take the side of the person who wants a divorce. That person will win the lawsuit without exception. There are no exceptions to this. That person will win the lawsuit and often will get the children at the same time. To go back to this issue right here, is the state of Texas actually practicing non-discrimination based on sex or marital status when it comes to the custodial parent relationship? There is no way that we can say that this is actually taking place. And this data comes from the Office of the Attorney General. There is no way that we can come to the conclusion that Texas is acting in a non-discriminatory manner. If you look at what the raw data says, and if you look at the Z-scores and everything else, it appears that the state of Texas is almost mandating fatherlessness. They're mandating that the father be a non-custodial parent, mandating that the mother be the custodial parent. And again, this is not for mothers, it's not against mothers, it's not for fathers, it's not against fathers. Children need both parents, and they need them in the same relationship together in marriage, and they need to be raised in a household with their own mother and father. The state of Texas is not doing this. I believe based on that, we should be able to call out the state of Texas. And again, I want to thank the Attorney General because he was the one that gave me the idea. Well, let's take a look at this from ZScore. And as you can see, even when you have a lower Z-score, and a lower Z-score here would be under 3.8, it's still very, very high. It's still unexpected. So if the Attorney General for the state of Texas can make the case to the Supreme Court that, hey, we have some type of fraud taking place here based on the statistical analysis, we have to come to the same conclusion for Texas. When it comes down to who is a custodial parent, the only way that it can be explained is through some type of fraud. So if you have a standard deviation 3.8 or above, this should almost never ever happen. And if it's over 4, once again, if it should almost never ever happen at 3.8, it should really never really happen if you got above 4, 4.5, something like that. This is just my analysis, and I realize that there are assumptions that I've made. I realize that people could say, well, I don't like your methodology. That's fine. My main point is to say, is there discrimination? And I think that any rational person would have to say something is wrong. The state of Texas actually is discriminating on the basis either of marital status or sex, primarily of sex, and that the Texas Family Code is lying to us. Something needs to be done to fix this situation. Thank you very much.